Sandy, episode 36. How are you?
I am wonderful. And hello to all of our listeners or viewers. Spring has not sprung where I'm at, but I'm trying to make the best of it because hopefully by the time everybody listens to this, it is springy and Eastery weekend and we get a beautiful one. But we always know that's kind of a crapshoot where we live, right?
Yes, I have pictures of my kids when they're little wearing winter coats on with their Easter dresses and stuff. And it's like, it was crazy.
I feel like more times than not, we have good weather. If anything, maybe it's a little rainy, but I feel like a majority of the pictures are nice. So I'm going to be wishful thinking. And actually, I've got my sweater dress on and I'm going to get my thick coat out because it's kind of fun to play dress up on what I'm going to say is the last wintry day. And, I'm going to put everything away by next weekend is my hope. So let's see if
Good for you.
it works.
So I went the opposite direction and I'm wearing my spring pink.
Nice.
And I was like, I'm like feeling ready for spring.
That's so the mixed karma is going to bring it. So
right. Which that brings us to the topic of conflict. Like our topic today is conflict, avoiding it, embracing it. And I'm just going to say this podcast is inspired by one of our listeners who sent me another podcast about conflict. And she was like, this is really a good conversation because she knows I'm involved in some other stuff that it could be helpful with. And when I was listening, I was like, oh my gosh, Sandy, we need to talk about this because it's so true. And the podcast was Michael Hyatt's podcast.
Oh, I like Michael Hyatt.
Yeah, it was how to handle dissent and disagreement in your organization. And we'll put the link in our stuff so that you can find it if you want to listen to it. So it was a lot about organizational dissent and conflict, but there's also this personal side of conflict,
right?
And so let's talk a little bit about thoughts on conflict. What do you think?
I like being able to talk about the personal side. I love the organizational side, but I guess my passion kind of lies in the personal side too, because even if you take the organizational side, I'm going to walk away a little bit because my dog is whining. If you take the organizational side,
yeah,
it comes down to personal as well. And I think there's even some themes in it of male versus female, of what happens when you don't deal with conflict. You create stories. There's a bit of passiveness with it. People embracing conflict. I don't like the word too. I tell you, I wish there was a better word. Conflict, it means war, right? Like right. It's some kind of, that's the natural feeling when I hear the word conflict is war. I wish there was a better word for it.
What about dissent?
Yeah, dissent is
like, I think dissent is a little bit, it's a little bit more neutral of you have one idea and somebody is dissenting. They're not waging war, right? And there's not a conflict. It's just like a disagreement and
productive communication, there's, and then you throw in too the fact that, sometimes conflict, because you can't get away from the word because it is there, right?
Right.
The other part of conflict is sometimes drama is associated with that. Some people enjoy conflict because it creates drama and an emotion that they get a charge off of. So there's so many positive things to conflict, and dealing with conflict in a good way and ignoring it really doesn't get you anywhere unless it's ignoring drama, right? Or being able to parse your way through that. So yeah, good subject, lots of different angles to this one, and we all deal with it. The real is conflict exists. Avoiding conflict when you need to have a conversation to either come to understanding. You don't necessarily have to have commonality. Okay, back to dissent. All the Supreme Court justices don't always agree on everything, and then they write their dissenting opinion, right? and they state why they don't agree, but many of them are still, they're friends and they appreciate each other in the end. But we
Right.
as humans
So
find that hard.
I think that's a really good point, because one of the articles or somewhere I was doing when I was doing all my research this week and finding all this stuff, one of the things it mentioned was you can have conflict and then you can have dissent, but you can still walk away in alignment, because I think it's key to let everyone voice their opinion, but then there's also this majority rules. So you think of the Supreme Court, we can have everybody writes their opinion. They get to all either be in favor or in dissent, but they come out of it aligned as the Supreme Court says this
Right?
is the
The
decision.
ruling.
Right, it's the ruling. So I think giving people the opportunity to voice
Right.
the dissent is a really good way to move to that resolve step of resolving the conflict. One of the things that the podcast mentioned was the physiological effects of when there's conflict, like somebody disagrees, and it's
Mhm.
that split second of what your body does. I don't know if you've ever experienced this. I'm
Oh,
sure.
all the time.
I was going to say, yeah. What are some of the things that happen to you?
It is taking it personally. And so because I'm taking it personally, you can read me like a book.
Yeah.
That's one thing I've always been told. Like you can just see something go in my face, in my mannerisms, because I'm trying to take and so knowing that as I've aged, and honestly, I'm going to give Garrett a lot of credit for this because he is the king of positive conflict.
Oh,
And it was
That's
very difficult for me because I wasn't used to that. I wasn't used to that because I don't think that's a normal trait for people. I think you have to work on it. And when you see the benefits of it and you find different techniques to have conversations, part of it is the crucial conversations, correct? Open
Mhm.
communication. But for me, when I feel that trigger, I have to immediately tell myself, don't take it personally. Listen, don't take it personally. And I would tell you, there is a core value that I always go back to in any kind of conversation, potential conflict, differing of opinion. And it really came off of my personal relationship with Garrett very early on. We were on second marriages, and both of us were looking for very open communication. And Garrett is very good at that. He wants to talk through everything, right? And so he likes conflict if it broadens communication and brings some form of consensus. So
Right.
silent treatment does not work for him. We talk everything out. He wants to gauge what I'm thinking. So there's no passive aggressive, that just doesn't exist, in our life. But my one driving point that I always go back to is there's real is different than right. Okay. So if you
Yeah.
take yourself out of the conversation for trying to be right. Okay. But the feelings are real. Right. So the feelings are real, but don't argue about who's right. Be open-minded to hear the feelings are real and where you're coming from with those feelings. And if you don't come from a place of trying to be right, there's less of a conflict that's felt and it's more of an understanding. So
Exactly. So I have a feeling you read my research before our podcast.
well, maybe Garrett did, and he's explained it to me when we talk things out. Could that be?
It could be, because a lot of it, that's a lot of what the research said, because this physiological thing goes back to, the Neanderthal time when there was conflict, was life or death. So there's a tiger chasing you down, and in a split second, you have to make a decision. So do you fight, do you flight, or do you freeze? I'm sure
Okay.
you've heard that, the fight, flight, freeze.
I hadn't actually. I like that.
Oh, you hadn't?
I
Oh,
hadn't. No. So
that's
you're
what
telling me something new.
there you go. So there's this fight is, staying there and digging in and being ready to fight. That flight is we're avoiding it. We're just going to run away and say, I'm not dealing with this conflict. And the freeze can actually be a really good tool. It's a pause. It's kind of like I'm not avoiding. If you freeze forever, then you are avoiding it. But that's where you can stop. And they said it ties into your amygdala. Is that right? Amygdala, your
Okay.
brain.
Okay.
So I know I'm not a scientist. So, and your amygdala gets hijacked in that moment of conflict for that split second. So it's you're going back to, natural instincts. Okay. And what you just said about that mantra of don't take it personal, that's exactly what they said, to have a mantra of, okay, I can feel my heart racing. I know I'm getting like I'm hijacked. And what am I going to do with this? So if you have a
Proving that you're right is not the right answer.
right. So it actually ties to going to being mindful of what's happening in your body and pausing. And they actually said, repeat a mantra, whatever your mantra is.
Mhm.
And then it said, start paying attention to sights and sounds and smells around you, because, you can sit here and you can be like, oh, okay. So because you're still listening, but you're trying to overcome this hijacking that's happened. So you're trying to focus on other things to kind of calm your system down. And then at that point, you start regulating your body better. And so you'll have a more maybe empathetic understanding, opening to this conversation.
So one of my other mantras is if I feel it escalating for different reasons, some different types of conflict,
Uh-huh.
is I'll just say, Sandy, chill the hell out. I
That's a
mean,
good
I'll kind of yell at myself a little bit and say, chill out. But, one thing that's interesting too, Amy, is to remember, some of the things we're talking about now, in generality, is dealing with conflict when you know that both parties, are being real, right? That maybe have different forms of opinion, whatever. But then there's the conflict with people that do not have good intent. And the example I'll give to you, and I did not know this, but culturally, different cultures embrace conflict differently, right? In America, it's not polite to conflict. Maybe that's changed a little bit. This was 5 years ago. I tell you, that has changed a little bit. So 5 years ago,
Yeah.
I worked a lot with people from Ireland, and
Okay.
they always called it Midwestern politeness and also American. But there was someone that played on that because he could get his way by creating conflict, because Americans didn't like that. And I observed him with business people in Ireland, and it was our joke. I called it, what do you call that fighting? I can't think of it now. It's been five. I called it ultimate fighting in suits, because that's how they would have. I'd sit on calls, and I mean, it was conflict, punching each other in the nose and back and forth, back and forth. And that's how they communicated. And
Mhm.
what he learned was, if he put conflict into a situation with his American counterparts, they were taken aback. They didn't know how to respond to it, and he got his way. So the reason I bring that up is, you can be manipulated by people through conflict, because our knee-jerk reaction is we don't like it. And, I think that's a more typical reaction. Some are different than others. We said male, female, cultural countries, but part of having those techniques and what you're talking about too is being able to still have a say at the table. So if back to work situations, people create conflict at times to get their way, because people will back off. So
Right.
controlling your response to it can have added benefits to the organization, because that's not organizationally good way to conduct business, right?
Right. Right. So in the Michael Hyatt podcast, one of the things he mentioned was to look at conflict as a gift. And I would say Garrett probably looks at it as a gift, because it helps him understand other perspectives, especially your perspective. But let's put this into an organization. So, you have this team of people, and if everyone's in agreement and you guys all walk out and nobody voices any kind of, hey, have we thought about this? Hey, there's if we don't create a safe space to have dissent and have those conversations, then that means you probably aren't getting a full awareness of what your project entails or what you're trying to do and how it affects people. Because everything has pros and cons. Everything.
Right.
I don't know of anything that has no cons.
So yeah, I'm going to take a different angle here because I'd like your
Okay.
input where this came up and why I wrote it down. Like I ran into the other room. Garrett and I were having dinner and
You ran in the other room. I love it.
I ran in the other room because I wanted to write it down. I didn't have a pen. Pause. I want to write that down. And what I wrote down were two things, two statements out of the conversation. Real is different than right. Okay. And the other thing was, and I put it in quotes, if you feel it, say it, which is actually comes out of a John Mayer song. And I probably talked about this before, but what the conversation was he was telling me about a friend of his that he was coaching because he was having some problems in his relationship with his girlfriend. And he kept saying, but I can't talk to her about that. She'll get upset. I can't bring that up because I don't know how she'll respond. And she's not a bad person, but there was obviously he's talking to Garrett and he doesn't want to talk to his girlfriend about these things. And my point was, can he start it on a level playing field to say, you know what, it's not about who's right or wrong. This isn't about, I'm not pointing the finger. This is just how I feel. This is how I, set that even playing field. But my point of bringing this up, and that's when I thought of these things by like, oh gosh, I wish he was having this conversation with him because he's just trying to make things better, right? But
Right.
she doesn't want the conflict and he doesn't want the conflict of her response. And it seems like the crazy train, right?
Right.
But how do you deal with conflict when you want to bring something up that starts conflict and the other person is going to respond in the way that we're talking about, right? So we can control ourselves and how we respond to conflict. But how about if you're the person that's bringing up a topic or something that is going to have this response that we're talking about? How do you coach that person to get into a conflicting conversation? What do you think? Because I'm going to write it down, Amy, and I'm going to tell Garrett over dinner when you tell me.
That's interesting because all the research I did was about how to handle yourself and how to, and one of the things that I had written down is how, it's kind of tied to that, is how if you want somebody to do something different and it's the conflict type of point, how do you, and they're not changing. So that's another avenue, but I don't know the answer to that. Do you have the answer? Or do you just have the question?
No, I think I thought about it a lot because back to when it's a real situation, you really try to think through how to deal with it because I like both of these people and it does no good for me. Women, this is what would happen, Amy, typically. I'm going to go and talk to her and say, well, guess what? He's talking to Garrett. So I'm talking to you. And how would I feel if I were her? Right. And it really needs to come from him. Right.
Yeah,
and again, Garrett's sharing with me. And that this is a real life situation. These kind of things happen all the time. So this is a real example. I think personally, I don't like it when people say to me, okay, you're not going to like what I say. Right. Because then I'm already right away. I'm like, he's overthought this. It's hard not to take it personally. I really do like, and Garrett and I did this a lot when we first started dating because I tended to be more, we're going to talk about everything. If he said, you know what, there's just some things I've been thinking about and they might seem out there and help me think through whether they're right or wrong. I don't think I'm right on this, but it's how I feel. Can we talk through it and, figure out maybe that approach?
I think that's a great approach because it's not saying you're doing this wrong and I want this. It's more of I'm feeling this way. Let's talk this through. And one of the things I'm remembering, so I love that is a great tip, is when we read that Thanks for the Feedback book,
Yep.
one of the foundational things that they said is you have to have a relationship of trust. Trust that everybody's in it with the right motives. We have things that we admire about people, we so that that foundational piece is there before you can give feedback. So that's huge. And I'm guessing if he's in a relationship, then they have that foundational piece.
Right.
So it's just creating the conversation that she feels safe.
And I think carrying that too, if you're in a meeting, it could be your association, it could be a board that I'm serving on, but really taking the trusting opinion, but saying, hey, throw the elephant, the elephant in the room. We're not all on the same page on this. Let's get each other's perspective and
Right.
let's talk this through and come with, don't do some big dissertation on, we need to blah, 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 or don't take a side, and just throw it out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And even some levity saying, it's real. We can all feel it. Let's, all tensions aside, cell phones down. Nothing's right or wrong. Let's talk, let's work this through.
Let's work this through. I like that idea of, and not pontificating of this is what's going wrong. This is what we need to do. It's just put it out there. I love that. All right. So, I love this conversation. I think we should do another podcast on this because
wouldn't it be fun to try different things? Like to try different, maybe I need to get out more a little bit right now. But to try different techniques or talk about real life examples of when they come up and how much better, as my dog is jumping on the door.
Sorry.
Amy and I are both jumping because the dog just jumped on the door. This is going to be called the Zeke episode. How do I deal with conflict with my dog? Well, there is no conflict because the world revolves around him. No, Amy, I'm with you. There's so many great conversations from this.
So we talked a little bit about avoiding conflict, and we mentioned it's not good to avoid conflict, but what are the pitfalls to avoiding conflict?
You make up stories is one. I think you avoid conflict because you make up stories in your head. I think things become even bigger than they are, just innately, because you make up stories in your head. You try to get people on your side. So you talk, look at what's happening with this example. We know what happens in the workplace. We know what happens in organizations that people make sides out of things. It happens in relationships because the friend's talking to my husband, his girlfriend, right?
And I think things simmer and they get bigger. They just grow if you address it right when it happens. I would say though that if you don't create a safe place for people to voice concerns or voice dissent, then you're creating an environment where it's simmering in them. And what I mean is, like, if you are constantly have that knee jerk and you're defensive, then you're creating avoidance in other people because they don't feel safe talking to you about anything. And I don't think that's good in personal relationships or work relations or any relationship. It's just not good. You have to make people feel safe.
I think another tip that I'd say, just a tip, because there are bad things, is conflict resolution comes more naturally for some people than others. Like Garrett innately is not going to take something personally. He loves feedback. And what I can tell you is, back to good versus bad, some people don't embrace these people that are very good with conflict resolution, because that doesn't, if it's individual, that doesn't feed their drama. They like conflict. If it's in the workplace, they're not getting their way. So another technique is, if you or if you work with somebody or relationship, those are usually the people to seek out. They're people that are seeking for harmony. They're listeners. They want to understand. Ask them, back to the buddy system, not to align, but to help bring something forward. Kind of like this friend went to Garrett. I think it's because he knows Garrett's very good at coaching on how to do that. on how to effectively do that, but embrace those people because they're out there. And I find that they tend to be the minority, but it's good to use their skills.
Yeah.
It's the divorce attorney really, because they're taking situations. That's the worst example because they're trying to find harmony and an end point in a bad situation.
Right.
And we all say there are certain people I could never do what they're doing, but they're good at it. So seek them out and partner with them and lean on them, right?
Right. And another person to partner with in group situations, work situations, are the ones that always dissent, the ones that like the drama, and have pre-conversations. I know I've done this in the groups that I serve with, is okay, I know this is going to be a sticky conversation for this person. They're not going to be on board. So how can I manage this change through with them to
Right.
get them to where they're
A
aligned at
great
the
point.
end? And so that you don't walk into a meeting and they're all they have that reaction. You can prepare them and say, okay, ask me some
Great
questions.
point.
And then you're engaging them and kind of mitigating their effect on the whole group and helping them and taking into consideration some of their dissent. It could be, oh, that's a good point. So anyway, one of
That's a
the
great
things,
point.
so here's a really quick question. There's two things I want to share. Can you tell? I can talk about this all day. um, is there ever a time when it's appropriate to avoid? And I'm going to say yes.
Mhm.
Social media. There's no reason to engage in social media if you disagree. There is absolutely no reason for most, unless unless it's just morally bad. You know what I mean? And then you need to speak up. But the other thing, I had a situation the other day where a stranger was talking to me, and we were in a confined space, and it was just she and I in the room. And she said something that made me really uncomfortable. And it was a racial comment. And it took me really, I was speechless. And I will tell you, I spent my whole Friday or all last Thursday, like beating myself up about not speaking up. And she was a stranger, but I was talking to my husband about it. I'm like, what is it about me that she thought it was okay to say that? And then she met my silence and she noticed I did not laugh. I didn't think it was funny. And then she did say, I shouldn't be like that. So I think she read my silence as, all right, this is not acceptable to this person, but I didn't say anything.
Some
So
people
what,
do like the shock factor, Amy. That's the thing I tell you is conflict is not always good if people, back to my point on, there was someone that I worked with that used conflict to get his way,
yeah,
to drive his thing, that the motive was not pure. And in part of social media is they like the shock factor, they like the attention. And so there are times that conflict is not good.
yeah.
I think I'll get back to one of our early podcasts. We talked about having, I can't remember what it was called. I'm sorry. Hard conversations. A lot of it was over politics, things like that. And you and I came to the conclusion that as long as all parties are open for new ideas and understanding, it's great. If it's just trying to win over people with your opinion, it's not. So I tell you, conflict, which is based off of opinion, that is trying to convince me or somebody else, that's not positive conflict. That's not proactive. That's just trying to get your way.
Right. Yeah. Very true. Very true. Okay. Oh, one thing, trying to get people to be open about feedback. Sometimes it's giving people, there are people that will never dissent because they just don't feel comfortable speaking up. And I read just the other day and I'm like, oh, I'm going to share this because this is such a good idea. If you ever have an idea project and you're wanting feedback, instead of saying, can you give me some feedback? You can say, can you rate this on a 1 to 10?
Nice.
And then when they say, I'd give it an 8, and then you can say, okay, what are the things that could get it to a 10? And then they might feel comfortable saying, well, if you did this, this, or this, or if you added this or whatever. Or
Kind
you
of
can
like an
say
open-ended question versus a closed question.
Right.
Um, it's a means to the end, right?
Right. Instead of saying feedback.
Strategy. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'd like some feedback, and then people are like, okay, how do I do this constructively? It's like all this things go on in our head.
That's awesome.
Okay.
So,
Real
Amy, do you think we're getting a little short on time? Yes. Should we do just real ideal?
Let's
Since we
do
had
real
another
ideal.
question?
Then I have just one quick wrap question. We'll go real ideal. The real is conflict happens. It's there. Ideal.
Open when you know there can be positive, there can be a positive end to the conflict, that there's going to be good that comes out of it. It isn't just arguing with somebody over social media or the woman in the grocery line. It's always good to take the personal out of it and make it an open conversation. And again, being open to other people's feelings and opinions, and don't make it from the very beginning about who's right and who's wrong.
I love that. And to that point, I think we're going to close without a wrap question. We will wrap it up next time with a fun question, because
the fun question.
That was a really good reflection to end on. Thank you, Sandy.
Well, goodbye to everyone. And when we talk next week, we're going to say spring has sprung. So
spring has sprung.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.